The forge stood at the edge of the valley where three trade roads met, and Quentin Irving had passed it a dozen times without stopping until the day his mare threw a shoe on the rocky approach, and he had no choice but to lead her through the open doors into the ringing heat within. The orc woman stood with her back to him, green-skinned and lean, her shoulders bunched as she brought the hammer down on a glowing plowshare. She wore a leather apron over a simple linen shirt with the sleeves rolled past her elbows, and her dark hair was tied back with a strip of cloth that had come half loose. When she set the plowshare aside and turned, Quentin saw the wince she tried to hide, the way her left hand went to her right shoulder and pressed as though she could push the pain back inside. "Help you." Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. Up close, he could see the small tusks that curved from her lower lip, the pointed ears, the fine scars on her forearms that spoke of years at the anvil. "Shoo," Quentin said, gesturing to his mare. "Threw it a mile back." She glanced at the horse, then at him, and he watched her make the assessment every smith made. The quality of his tack, the weight of his saddlebags, whether he could pay. He was a large man, broad through the chest and arms, and he dressed plainly in wool and leather that had seen hard use. His hands, when he held them out to show they were empty of threat, were calloused and strong. "Can do it now," she said. "Name is Willa Hargrave. This is my forge, Quentin Irving." He led the mare forward. "Farrier by trade, mostly. Some healing work when I can get it." Willa's eyes sharpened at that, but she only nodded and moved to examine the mare's hoof. Quentin watched her work with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times, but when she reached for the rasp, her whole body tensed and the wince came again, deeper this time. "Your shoulders," Quentin said. It was not a question. "Long week." Willa did not look up. "Spring planting means every farmer in the valley needs shares, and they all needed them yesterday. I can help with that." Now she did look up, and there was suspicion in her dark eyes. "The shoe." "The shoulders." For a moment, Willa only stared at him, and Quentin could see her turning it over in her mind, weighing the offer against whatever experiences had taught her to be wary of human men who offered help to orc women. Then she shrugged, and the movement made her flinch. "Cannot hurt worse than it does now," she said. Quentin gestured to the bench near the forge. "Sit." She sat, her back straight despite the pain, and Quentin moved behind her. He had done this work before, for horses first and then for the people who worked them, farmers and smiths and laborers whose bodies bore the weight of their trades. He set his hands on her shoulders, feeling the knots beneath the skin, the muscles drawn tight as bowstrings. "Tell me if it is too much," he said, and began to work. His thumbs found the worst of it, the places where the muscle had contracted and would not release. Willa made a sound low in her throat, something between a gasp and a groan, and Quentin felt her shoulders try to hunch away from the pressure. "Breathe," he said quietly. "It will ease." She breathed, and gradually the muscles began to soften under his hands. Quentin worked slowly, methodically, finding each knot and pressing until it released. The forge was hot and the air smelled of coal smoke and hot metal, and somewhere outside a crow called. Willa's head dropped forward as the tension drained out of her, and Quentin could see the knobs of her spine beneath the linen shirt, the strong line of her neck. "Where did you learn this?" Her voice was quieter now, almost drowsy. "Old cavalry surgeon," Quentin said. "Said half the work of healing was in the hands, not the herbs. Taught me to feel what was wrong before I tried to fix it. Were you cavalry? For a time. Long time ago." He worked in silence after that, until the knots were gone and Willa's shoulders sat level and easy. When he stepped back, she rolled them experimentally, and her face showed the wonder of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to move without pain. "That is." She trailed off, searching for words. "I have not felt this good in weeks. You need to rest them, Quentin said. Take a day, let them heal properly. Willa laughed, a short, sharp sound. Rest, with 20 plowshares still to finish and the farmers coming for them tomorrow. She stood and went back to the anvil, and Quentin saw that she moved differently now, the stiffness gone from her spine. She picked up the hammer, and this time when she swung it, there was no wince, only the clean arc of the blow and the ring of metal on metal. Quentin watched her work while she finished the shoe for his mare, and when she fitted it and took his coin, he thought that would be the end of it. But as he led the mare back out into the afternoon sun, Willa called after him. If you are passing through again, she said, and you have the time, the shoulders, they might need it again. I pass through often enough, Quentin said. I will stop. He did stop, 3 days later, though he told himself it was only because the road brought him that way regardless. Willa was at the forge again, hammering out a set of hinges, and when she saw him, she set down the hammer and wiped her hands on her apron. They are bad again, she said, and it was not quite a question. Let me see. She sat on the bench without argument this time, and Quentin set his hands on her shoulders and found them almost as tight as before. He worked the knots out again, feeling the way her body relaxed under his touch, hearing the small sound she made when he found a particularly bad spot. When he finished, she sat for a moment with her eyes closed, breathing deep. You are good at this, she said. Practice. No. She opened her eyes and turned to look at him over her shoulder. It is more than that. You have a gift for it. Quentin did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Willa went back to her work and he went back to the road, but the pattern had been set. Every few days he would find a reason to pass by the forge, and every time Willa's shoulders would need tending, and every time Quentin would work out the knots with his broad, patient hands. It was on the 5th visit that he began to notice something strange. Willa's hinges, which on his first visit had been clean and true, were coming out crooked. A gate she was working on had one bar set higher than the other. She cursed when she saw it and threw the whole piece back into the coals to reheat, but Quentin saw the way her eyes slid toward him when she thought he was not looking. The 6th time he came, a young orc man was working the bellows, a boy of perhaps 16 with the gangling build of someone still growing into his height. He watched Quentin with open curiosity as Willa sat on the bench, and Quentin's hands found her shoulders. Master Hargrave, the boy said, those hinges from yesterday, the ones for Miller Garrett, he came by and said they do not fit the frame. I will fix them, Willa said, but her voice was tight. And the plowshare you finished this morning has a crack in it. I found it when I was sorting the completed work. Then I will make another one. Willa's shoulders were nodding up again even as Quentin tried to ease them loose. Is there anything else you need to tell me, Yorick? The boy, Yorick, looked uncertain. No, master. Only. You have not made mistakes like this before. Not since I started apprenticing. I wondered if you were ill. I am fine, Willa said. Just tired. Now get back to the bellows before the fire dies. Yorick went, but he cast one more puzzled look at Quentin before he did. Quentin worked in silence, his hands moving over the tense muscles of Willa's shoulders, and he thought about the crooked hinges and the cracked plowshare and the way she had looked at him. You are making them wrong on purpose, he said quietly. Willa went very still. What? The work. You are making mistakes so that your shoulders stay sore, so that I keep coming back. For a long moment she did not speak, and Quentin thought she might deny it or tell him to leave. Then she let out a long breath and her shoulders sagged under his hands. Yes, she said. Why? Because I am a fool. Her voice was rough. Because you are the first person in longer than I can remember who has touched me with kindness, and I did not want it to stop. So I thought if I kept working too hard, kept making my shoulders worse, you would keep coming back. I did not think about the rest of it, the reputation. The money I lose remaking what I ruin. Quentin's hand stilled on her shoulders. He could feel the heat of her skin through the thin linen, the steadiness of her breathing. Outside the forge the world went on, people passing on the trade roads, the sun moving toward evening, but in this moment there was only the two of them and the truth hanging in the air between them. "You do not need to ruin your work for me to come back," Quentin said. "Do I not?" Willa turned on the bench to face him, and her dark eyes were fierce. "You are a traveler. You go where the road takes you. Why would you keep coming to a forge in the middle of nowhere if there was no reason? Maybe I want to. Want to." She said it like the words were foreign. "You want to visit an orc blacksmith. A woman everyone else in this valley does their best to avoid unless they need something made or mended." "Yes." Why? Quentin thought about that, about the answer he could give that would be safe and easy, and then he thought about the truth. "Because when I work the knots from your shoulders and you make that sound, the one that is halfway between pain and relief, I feel something I have not felt in a long time. Because when you move without hurting afterward, it matters to me that you are well. Because I think about you when I am on the road, and I find reasons to come back this way even when it is not the shortest route." Willa stared at him, and he watched her trying to understand, trying to believe. "I am an orc," she said, as though he might have forgotten. "I know. People do not." She stopped, started again. "Human men do not court orc women. It is not done. Maybe it should be." She laughed then, sudden and surprised, and it changed her whole face. "You are serious. You are standing in my forge telling me you have feelings for me, and you are serious." "Yes. I have ruined a week's worth of work trying to keep you coming around, and now you tell me I did not need to." "Yes." Willa shook her head, but she was smiling now, small and wondering. "What do we do now?" "I stay," Quentin said. "If you want me to, I help with the work. You let me tend your shoulders when they need it, but you stop making mistakes that cost you money and reputation, and we see where this goes. You would stay, give up the road, for a while, maybe longer." He met her eyes. "If you want me to." Willa stood, and she was tall for an orc woman, coming up nearly to his chin. She reached out and took his hand, her palm rough with calluses, and threaded her fingers through his. "I want you to," she said. That evening, Quentin brought his saddlebags in from where they had been hanging on his mare outside, and Willa showed him the small room behind the forge where she slept. It was clean and spare, with a narrow bed and a chest for clothes and little else. They stood in the doorway together, and the awkwardness of the moment settled over them like a blanket. "I can sleep in the front," Quentin said. "Near the forge. I do not want to presume. You can sleep here." Willa's voice was quiet. "With me, if you want. Just sleep, I mean, for now." "I want to." They lay down together on the narrow bed, Quentin on his back and Willa curled on her side facing him, and for a long time they simply looked at each other in the dim light that filtered in from the forge. Quentin reached out and brushed a strand of dark hair back from her face, and Willa closed her eyes at the touch. "I cannot believe you are real," she said. "I am real, and you will still be here in the morning." "Yes." She slept then, her breathing evening out, and Quentin lay awake listening to the sound of it and feeling the warmth of her body next to his. He thought about the road and the life he had been living, always moving, never staying, and he thought about the forge and the woman beside him and the future that was suddenly opening up before him like a door. In the morning Willa woke first, and Quentin opened his eyes to find her propped on one elbow watching him. The dawn light came through the small window above the bed, turning her green skin to gold. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. My shoulders feel fine." "That is good." "So you do not have to massage them?" "No, but you are still here." "Yes," she smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her smile without reservation, wide and bright and beautiful. "Good," she said, and kissed him. It was a careful kiss, tentative, as though she was not quite sure how it was done. Quentin kissed her back gently, his hand coming up to cup her face, and felt her relax into it. When they parted, she was flushed, her eyes bright. "I have never—" She started, then stopped. "Never what?" "Kissed anyone, not like that." Quentin felt something tighten in his chest. "Never. Who would I kiss? The farmers who come here treat me like a necessary evil. The other orcs in the area are all men, and none of them—" She trailed off. "I have been alone a long time, not anymore. No." She kissed him again, less tentative this time. "Not anymore." They rose and dressed, and Willa made breakfast over the forge fire, porridge with honey and dried apples. Yorick arrived as they were finishing, and he stopped in the doorway when he saw Quentin sitting at the small table as though he belonged there. "Master Hargrave," Yorick said slowly, his eyes moving between them, "is something—" "Quentin is staying on for a while," Willa said. "He is going to help around the forge." "Help?" Yorick sounded skeptical. "I know my way around a bellows," Quentin said, "and I can handle simple repairs. Leave you and your master free for the skilled work." Yorick looked at Willa, clearly waiting for her to say more, but she only nodded. "That is right. Now let us get to work. We have hinges to remake and a plowshare to replace." The day fell into a rhythm. Willa and Yorick worked at the anvil while Quentin managed the bellows and the fire, keeping the heat steady and the coals bright. He watched Willa work, the sure movements of her hands, the way she judged the temperature of the metal by color alone. She had been doing this since she was Yorick's age, he learned, apprenticed to the human smith who had owned the forge before her. "He left it to me when he died," she said during a break, wiping sweat from her forehead. "His family tried to contest it, said an orc had no business owning a forge, but the will was clear and the magistrate upheld it. They have hated me for it ever since. The family, the whole town. Or most of it. They use my services because I am good and my prices are fair, but they do not have to like it." She shrugged. "I am used to it. You should not have to be." "Maybe not, but that is the world we live in." Quentin thought about that as he worked the bellows, about the world that made a woman like Willa live in loneliness, because of what she was rather than who she was. It made him angry, a slow, burning anger that settled in his gut and stayed. The hinges came out true this time, and the plowshare perfect. Miller Garrett came by in the afternoon to collect them, a stocky human with iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "About time," he said when Willa handed over the hinges. "I expected these 3 days ago. And I remade them to get them right," Willa said evenly. "No charge for the second set." Garrett grunted and examined the hinges with a critical eye, but even he could find no fault with them. He paid and left without another word, though Quentin saw the way his eyes lingered on him, calculating. "He will talk," Willa said when Garrett was gone. "By tonight the whole valley will know you are staying here. Does that bother you? I do not know yet. Ask me tomorrow, when we see what happens." What happened was that the next morning 3 women came to the forge. They were human, farm wives in homespun dresses, and they stood in the doorway with their arms crossed and their faces set. "Willa Hargrave," the oldest of them said, a woman with gray streaks in her brown hair and a voice like a drill sergeant. "We need to speak with you." Willa set down her hammer and wiped her hands. "Mistress Carson, what can I do for you? You can tell us what that man is doing here." Mistress Carson jerked her chin at Quentin. "Garrett says he has been here near a week now, sleeping in your forge. Quentin is helping with the work. And what business is it of yours where he sleeps? It is our business when the only smith in the valley is making a spectacle of herself." One of the other women spoke up now, younger with a pinched face. "People are talking, Willa, saying things." "What things?" "You know what things. That you have taken up with a human man, that you are, together." Willa's jaw set, and Quentin could see the muscles in her shoulders tensing. He wanted to step forward to say something, but this was her forge and her fight. He stayed by the bellows and waited. "And if I have," Willa said quietly. "What concern is it of yours, Mistress Perry?" "It is indecent," Mistress Carson said. "Unnatural. And it reflects badly on all of us to have it happening right here in the open." "I see." Willa's voice was cold now. "Tell me, Mistress Carson, when you needed that gate mended last winter, the one your husband could not fix, did you care then that I was an orc? When you, Mistress Perry, needed your plow repaired in the middle of spring planting and I dropped everything else to do it, was it indecent then? When any of you need my skills you come running, but now that I might have something for myself, you have opinions about it." The women looked uncomfortable, but Mistress Carson rallied. "That is different. How, business is business, but this, fraternizing, it is not right. Not right." Willa took a step forward and the women stepped back. "You want to talk about what is not right? Let me tell you what is not right. I have lived in this valley for 15 years. I have made your tools and shod your horses and mended everything you have broken, and in all that time not one of you has invited me to your table or asked me to your gatherings. I am good enough to serve you but not good enough to befriend. And now you come here and tell me I cannot have the one person who sees me as something other than a convenience or a threat. We are only trying to help," Mistress Perry said weakly. "No, you are trying to control me. And I will not have it." Willa pointed to the door. "Get out of my forge, all of you, and do not come back unless it is to pay for my work and nothing else." The women left, muttering among themselves, and Willa stood in the middle of the forge with her fists clenched and her breathing hard. Quentin went to her and put his hands on her shoulders, and she leaned back against him. "That was brave," he said. "That was foolish. I just alienated half my customers. They will be back. They need you. Maybe." She turned in his arms to face him. "But maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should not have. Maybe you should not have stayed. Do you want me to go?" "No, God, no." She pressed her forehead against his chest. "But I do not want to ruin you either. Do not want you to lose work or friends because of me. I have no friends here. And the work I do, I can do anywhere. But there is only one you, Willa, and I am not going anywhere." She held on to him for a long moment, and when she pulled back her eyes were wet. "How did I get so lucky? I am the lucky one." Yorick, who had been standing awkwardly by the anvil during the whole exchange, cleared his throat. Should I go?" "No," Willa said, wiping her eyes. "Stay, we have work to do." They worked, and the day passed, and when evening came Quentin made dinner while Willa and Yorick finished the last of the commissions. He had brought supplies from the village, vegetables and a chicken, and he roasted it over the forge fire with herbs he found growing wild near the road. The smell filled the forge, rich and savory, and when Willa came to see what he was making her eyes widened. "When did you learn to cook like this?" "Cavalry," Quentin said. "You learn fast or you eat badly." They ate together, the three of them, and Yorick talked about the work he was learning, the way metal behaved under the hammer, the art of reading the color of the heat. He was a good apprentice, Willa said, patient and careful, and he would be a fine smith one day if he kept at it. "Will you take over the forge?" Quentin asked. "When Willa retires." Yorick glanced at Willa, uncertain. "I do not know, maybe, if there is still a forge to take over." "There will be," Willa said firmly. "I am not going anywhere, and neither are my customers, no matter what they say." But the next day brought another visitor, and this one was not a farm wife. He was a large man, thick through the middle and balding, and he wore the fine wool coat of a merchant. His name was Tomas Vance, and he owned the largest farm in the valley. "Willa," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "I hear you have had some excitement. If you mean the gossips coming to my door, then yes," Willa said. She was working on a set of horseshoes and she did not stop for Vance. I mean the man. Vance looked at Quentin, his eyes cold. I do not believe we have met, Quentin Irving. Irving. And what brings you to our valley, Mr. Irving? Work, same as anywhere, work. Vance smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. And you found work here at Willa's forge. How convenient. Is there something you need, Mr. Vance? Willa set down her hammer and turned to face him. Or did you come here just to be unpleasant? I came to give you some advice, as a friend. We are not friends. No, perhaps not, but I am a customer and a significant one, and I am telling you that this association with Mr. Irving is bad for business. People are uncomfortable. They are talking about taking their work to the smith in Riverford. Riverford is 2 days' travel from here, Willa said. They will not go that far just to avoid me. Maybe not all of them, but some will, and the ones who stay will remember this. They will remember that you chose a dalliance over propriety. Vance's voice hardened. I am giving you a chance to make this right, Willa. Send him away. Tell people it was a mistake and this all blows over. And if I do not, then you will find out how hard it is to run a forge with no customers. Quentin stepped forward, his hands curling into fists, but Willa put a hand on his arm. I appreciate your advice, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice like ice, but I do not need it. Quentin stays. And if people want to take their business to Riverford, let them. I will manage. Vance's face darkened. You are making a mistake. That is my choice to make. He left, and the silence he left behind was heavy. Yorick had stopped working entirely, his eyes wide, and Quentin could see the fear in them. Master Hargrave, the boy said quietly, if you lose the customers, what will happen to my apprenticeship? You will finish it, Willa said. I promise you that. Even if I have to take on work from 3 valleys over, you will finish your training. But the worry did not leave Yorick's face, and Quentin could see the same worry in Willa's eyes when she thought he was not looking. That night, lying in bed together, she was quiet and tense. Talk to me, Quentin said. I am afraid, she said. I have never been afraid of anything in my life, but I am afraid now. Afraid that I am going to lose everything I have built because I was selfish enough to want something for myself. You are not selfish. Then what am I, human, or orc? Or whatever word we use for someone who wants to be loved and to love in return. There is no shame in that. There is when it costs you everything. Quentin pulled her close, feeling the tension in her body. What if I could bring in money, take on farrier work, healing work? Help support the forge until the customers come back. You would do that. I am here, am I not? I am not going to let you lose this place, not because of me. Willa was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I have never had anyone fight for me before, never had anyone who would stand beside me when things got hard. I do not know how to do this. Neither do I. We will learn together. The next weeks were difficult. True to Vance's word, some of the customers did stop coming. Not all of them, but enough that the work slowed noticeably. Willa kept her head down and focused on the commissions she did have, making sure every piece was perfect, while Quentin took his tools and went from farm to farm offering his services. He shod horses and treated a draft ox with a split hoof and set a broken leg for a farm wife who had taken a bad fall. He charged fair prices and did good work, and slowly people began to seek him out. Not the ones who had turned on Willa, but the ones who were willing to judge him on his own merits. There was an older farmer named Samuel Briggs who had a bad back and asked Quentin to work on it the way he had seen Quentin work on Willa's shoulders. Quentin did, and when the pain eased, Briggs paid him double what he asked. You have a gift, Briggs said. Do not let the small-minded people in this valley make you forget that. You do not mind, about Willa and me, Briggs shrugged. I mind my own business and expect others to do the same. Willa is a good smith. You seem like a decent man. What you do together is your own affair." It was not much, but it was something. And slowly, a few others came around. A young couple who needed their wagon repaired and did not care about gossip. A widow who needed new hinges for her barn and said that Willa's were the best in 3 valleys. The work trickled in, enough to keep the forge running, and Quentin's earnings helped fill the gaps. But the real turning point came 6 weeks after Vance's visit. It was late afternoon, and Willa was working on a complicated commission, a decorative gate for a landowner in the next valley, when a rider came thundering up to the forge. He was a young man, barely out of his teens, and his face was white with fear. "Please," he gasped, half falling off his horse. "I need help. My father, he was working on the roof of the barn and he fell. His leg is broken and there is so much blood. We cannot get him to Riverford. He will not survive the journey. Please, someone said there was a healer here." Quentin was already moving, grabbing his bag of supplies from where he kept it near the door. "How far?" 2 miles. "The Kendrick farm, please hurry." "I am coming." Quentin swung up onto his mare. "Willa." "Go," she said. "I will finish up here." He went, following the young man at a gallop, and when they reached the Kendrick farm, he found a scene of controlled chaos. The farmer, a man in his 40s, was lying in the dirt near the barn with his leg bent at an unnatural angle. His wife and 2 daughters were trying to stop the bleeding from a gash in his scalp, but they looked close to panic. Quentin dismounted and went to work. He had the women bring clean cloth and hot water, and he examined the leg first. It was a bad break, the bone visible through the skin, but he had set worse. He gave the man something to bite on, and then, with the wife and son holding him down, he pulled the bone straight and set it, binding it tight with splints and bandages. The head wound was less serious than it looked. Scalp wounds always bled heavily, and he cleaned and stitched it while the farmer drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was done, he mixed a draft for the pain and made sure the man swallowed it. "He needs to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks, Quentin said. "Maybe longer. And someone needs to watch him tonight, make sure he does not fall into a deep sleep he cannot wake from. If he does, come get me immediately." "You saved his life," the wife said, tears streaming down her face. "How can we ever repay you?" "No need, just doing what I can. But we must pay you something. We do not have much, but—" "A hot meal would be welcome," Quentin said, "if you can spare it." They fed him stew and bread, and the son, whose name was Daniel, asked him about his work and where he had learned it. Quentin told him about the cavalry, about the surgeon who had taught him, and Daniel listened with the rapt attention of someone who had found a new hero. "You should set up properly," Daniel's mother said. "In the village, people need a healer and the nearest one is in Riverford." "I am set up," Quentin said, "at the forge, with Willa Hargrave." The name hung in the air, and Quentin watched the family exchange glances. Finally, the father, who had been awake enough to listen, spoke from where he lay on the bed they had moved him to. "The Orc Smith," he said, his voice rough. "Yes, heard you were with her. People talk." "They do." The farmer was quiet for a moment. "She did good work on our plow last year." "Fast, fair price. I do not care what she is, long as she does right by us. And if you are with her, I do not care about that either. You saved my life today. That is all that matters to me." It was a small thing, but word spread. The farmer who had been saved by the healer living with the Orc Smith. The man who did not care about the gossip, because Quentin Irving had pulled him back from death. More people began to come to the forge, some for Willa's smithing and some for Quentin's healing, and the 2 of them working together became a fixture rather than a scandal. Tomas Vance came by one more time, a month after the incident at the Kendrick farm, and this time his tone was different. "I need a new set of plow blades," he said. "Mine cracked last week and I cannot wait for Riverford." "I can have them ready in 3 days," Willa said. 3 days. Vance looked at Quentin, who was working on a poultice at the small table they had set up for his healing work. "I suppose I should congratulate you. You have managed to make this situation work." "It was never a situation," Willa said coldly. "It was my life." "Yes. Well." Vance shifted uncomfortably. 3 days, then, and Willa, about what I said before, I may have been hasty. "You were an ass," Willa said flatly. "But I will still make your plow blades. Business is business after all." Vance left, and Willa turned to Quentin with a small smile. "I think we have won. I think we have." That night they celebrated, just the two of them, with a bottle of wine Quentin had been saving and a meal they cooked together. They ate and drank and talked about the future, about what it might look like now that the forge was stable again and the customers were coming back. "I want to expand," Willa said. "Take on more apprentices, maybe. Yorick is good, but he cannot do it all, and there is more work than I can handle alone." "That sounds good. And you, what do you want?" Quentin thought about it, about the question he had been asking himself for weeks now. "I want to stay," he said. "Not just for a while, permanently." "If you will have me," Willa's eyes went wide. "Permanently?" "Yes, I want to build a life here with you. I want to keep doing the healing work, but I want to come home to you every night. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "I want this to be real, not just something we are trying out. Real." "It is already real," Willa said quietly. "It has been real since the day you first put your hands on my shoulders and made the pain go away, since the day you chose to stay when anyone else would have left. Then marry me." The words hung in the air between them, and Quentin saw the moment they landed, the way Willa's face transformed from surprise to joy to fear and back to joy again. "Marry you," she repeated. "Yes, if you want to. I know it is not common, a human and an orc, but yes, yes. Yes, I will marry you," she laughed, the sound bright and incredulous. "Yes, Quentin Irving, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and long, and when they parted they were both breathless. They made love that night for the first time, slow and careful and full of wonder, and afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow bed and talked about the wedding they would have. "It should be small," Willa said. "Just the people who matter. Yorick, Samuel Briggs, the Kendricks. A few others. What about a magistrate or a priest? There is a traveling priest who comes through every few months, Father Benedict. He married the old smith and his wife years ago. He will marry us, I think, even though you are an orc." "Father Benedict does not care about things like that. He says love is love, and God sees the heart, not the skin." Father Benedict did marry them, on a bright morning in early summer when the valley was green and the air smelled of new grass. They stood in front of the forge with their friends gathered around, and Willa wore a dress of deep blue that Quentin had bought for her in the village. She looked beautiful, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her small tusks catching the light when she smiled. Quentin wore his best clothes, plain but clean, and when Father Benedict asked him if he took Willa to be his wife, he said yes in a voice that carried across the valley. Willa's yes was quieter, almost a whisper, but no less certain. They exchanged rings, simple bands of iron that Willa had forged herself, and when Father Benedict pronounced them, married Quentin pulled Willa into his arms and kissed her while their friends cheered. The celebration was simple but joyful. Samuel Briggs brought a roast pig, the Kendricks brought fresh bread and cheese, and someone else brought a cask of ale. They ate and drank and danced to music played on a fiddle by one of the farmers, and Quentin danced with his wife under the summer sky and felt happier than he had ever been in his life. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Yorick approached them with a small package wrapped in cloth. "For you," he said, his young face serious. "Master Hargrave, you have been good to me, better than I deserved sometimes. And Mr. Irving, you have been kind. So I made you something." Willa unwrapped the package and found two small iron figures, beautifully detailed. One was a man with a hammer, the other an orc woman at an anvil. They were fitted together so they stood side by side, the man's arm around the woman's waist. "Yorick," Willa said, her voice thick, "this is beautiful. I wanted you to have something to remember today, and to remember that not everyone in this valley is small-minded." Yorick smiled. "You two give me hope. That is worth more than you know." Willa hugged him and Quentin shook his hand, and when the last guest had gone, they stood together looking at the iron figures in the fading light. "We should put them on the mantel," Willa said, "so we see them every day. Good idea." They went inside, and Quentin set the figures on the narrow shelf above the forge where the firelight would catch them. Then he turned to Willa and pulled her close. "Hello, wife," he said. "Hello, husband." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "Take me to bed." They made love again that night, with more confidence than the first time, learning the shape of each other's pleasure. Afterward, Willa lay with her head on Quentin's chest, tracing patterns on his skin with her fingers. "Tell me about the future," she said. "What you see when you think about it." "I see this forge, bigger than it is now. I see apprentices learning at your side, making things that last. I see me doing my healing work, helping people. I see us growing old together. Children," Quentin's hand stilled on her hair. "Do you want children?" "I do not know. I never let myself think about it before. It did not seem possible, an orc woman having a family, but now." She looked up at him. "With you it seems possible. Do you want them?" "I think I do. Someday, not right away, but someday." "Then someday we will have them." Willa smiled. "A whole houseful of little half-orcs running around the forge, getting into trouble, driving us mad." "Driving us mad," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." The seasons turned. Summer faded into autumn, and the forge was busy with work preparing for winter. Quentin's healing practice grew as more people in the valley came to trust him, and there were days when he was called away from dawn to dusk, tending to injuries and illnesses. But he always came home to Willa, to the warm forge and the narrow bed and the life they were building together. Winter came hard that year, with heavy snows that blocked the roads and made travel nearly impossible. The forge became a gathering place for those who could make it through the drifts, a warm refuge where people could wait out the worst of the storms. Willa and Quentin kept the fire burning day and night, and more than once they woke to find someone sleeping near the forge, too tired or too cold to make it home. It was during one of these storms that Mistress Carson came to the door, her face pinched with cold and fear. "My granddaughter," she said without preamble. "She is sick. Fever, cough. I cannot get her to Riverford, and the snow is too deep for you to come to us. Can you help?" Quentin looked at Willa and she nodded. "Bring her here," Quentin said. "We will take care of her." Mistress Carson went and came back an hour later with a girl of perhaps 8, wrapped in blankets and shivering despite the layers. Quentin examined her by the light of the forge and found the signs of lung fever, the same illness that had killed so many that winter. He worked through the night, mixing poultices and drafts, keeping the girl warm and hydrated. Willa helped, following his instructions without question, and together they brought the fever down. By morning the girl was sleeping peacefully, her breathing easier, and Mistress Carson was crying with relief. "Thank you," she said to Quentin. "Thank you both. I was wrong about you, wrong about all of it. Can you forgive me?" "There is nothing to forgive," Willa said quietly. "She is well. That is all that matters." Mistress Carson left with her granddaughter when the storm cleared, but before she went, she pressed a small bag of coins into Willa's hand. "For your kindness," she said, and for mine which I did not show when I should have." It was not a dramatic reconciliation, but it was real, and it marked a change. More of the people who had turned away began to return, not all at once but gradually, and by spring the forge was busier than it had ever been. Willa hired a second apprentice, a young orc woman named Zara who had walked for 3 days to find work. She was talented and eager, and she fit into the rhythm of the forge as though she had always been there. Yorick took it upon himself to teach her what he had learned, and Quentin watched the two of them work together and saw the future Willa had talked about taking shape. It was in the middle of that spring, a year after their wedding, that Willa came to Quentin with news. "I am pregnant," she said. Quentin felt the world shift under his feet, realigning into a new shape. "You are certain as I can be. I have missed my courses twice now, and I am sick in the mornings. I think it is real." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" "I am terrified, and so happy I can barely breathe." Willa laughed, and it was the sound of pure joy. "Me too. Both of those things, all at once." The pregnancy was not easy. Willa was sick often in the early months, and she grew tired more quickly than she ever had before. But she kept working, adjusting her pace to accommodate the changes in her body, and Quentin was there to support her whenever she needed it. He massaged her shoulders when they ached, which they did often now from the weight she carried in front. He cooked meals that would not upset her stomach and brewed teas that helped with the nausea. He lay awake at night with his hand on her belly, feeling the baby move, and marveled at the life they had created together. As Willa's belly grew, the people of the valley rallied around them in ways Quentin had not expected. The women who had once come to scold Willa now came to offer advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. The farmers brought gifts of food and firewood, more than they could use. Samuel Briggs built a cradle, beautifully crafted from oak, and delivered it with a gruff declaration that every baby needed a proper place to sleep. Even Thomas Vance, who had been so set against them, stopped by one day with a bolt of soft linen. "For the baby," he said, not quite meeting their eyes. "My wife insisted." "Thank you," Willa said, and she meant it. The baby came in the early hours of a winter morning when the world was still dark and the stars were bright overhead. Willa's labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Quentin feared he would lose her. But she was strong and determined, and she brought their son into the world with a final, primal cry. The baby was perfect, small and squalling and green-skinned like his mother, with Quentin's dark hair and Willa's pointed ears. He had no tusks yet. Those would come later, but his eyes were bright and alert, and he looked at his parents as though he knew exactly who they were. "He is beautiful," Quentin whispered, his voice breaking. "He is ours," Willa said, and she was crying too. They named him Yates, a strong name for a strong boy, and he became the center of their world. Quentin had thought he understood love before, had thought he knew what it meant to care for someone more than himself, but holding his son changed everything. He would have walked through fire for this child, would have faced down any enemy, would have given anything to keep him safe. Willa returned to work at the forge slowly, bringing Yates with her in a sling on her back. He seemed to like the heat and the ringing of the hammer, and he would sleep through the noise that would have kept any other baby awake. Yorick and Zara doted on him, taking turns holding him when Willa needed both hands for a difficult piece, and the forge became a family in truth. The months passed, and Yates grew from a tiny infant to a robust baby who laughed at the sparks from the forge and reached for the tools with chubby hands. Quentin taught him to hold a rattle, then a spoon, then a small wooden hammer that Yorick carved for him. Willa sang to him in the evenings, old orc songs her mother had taught her, and Quentin listened and memorized the words so he could sing them too. On Yates's first birthday, they had a small celebration, just the family and a few close friends. The baby smashed his hands into a cake Quentin had baked and laughed as the frosting went everywhere, and Willa looked at Quentin over their son's head with so much love in her eyes that he felt his chest tighten. "We did this," she said quietly. "We built this life. Against everything and everyone who said we could not." "We did," Quentin agreed, "and we will keep building it for him, for us, for however long we have." "However long we have," Quentin echoed, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The years that followed were good ones. The forge prospered, and Quentin's healing practice became known throughout the valley and beyond. They added a room to the building for Yates, then another when Willa became pregnant again. Their second son, Tobias, was born on a spring morning 2 years after Yates, and he was as different from his brother as could be. Where Yates was bold and loud, Tobias was quiet and thoughtful. Where Yates ran headlong into everything, Tobias watched and waited. But they loved each other fiercely, and Quentin and Willa watched them grow with pride and wonder. Yorick completed his apprenticeship and became a journeyman, staying on at the forge to work alongside Willa. Zara proved to be a master in her own right, specializing in decorative work that brought customers from as far as the capital. The forge became known not just in the valley but across the region, and people spoke of Willa Hargrave Irving with respect and admiration. Quentin's hair began to gray at the temples, and Willa found laugh lines around her eyes that had not been there before. They were growing older, their bodies showing the marks of time and hard work, but they were happy. The love between them had not faded but had instead deepened, becoming something richer and more complex. They still slept in the same narrow bed, though they had long since been able to afford a larger one. Quentin still massaged Willa's shoulders when they were sore, though now it was as much ritual as necessity. She still hammered at the anvil, though these days Yorick and Zara did most of the heavy work. They had built a life together, piece by piece, and it was a good life. On their 10th anniversary, Quentin took Willa up into the hills above the valley, to a spot he had found years before. They left the boys with Yorick and Zara and rode out in the early morning, climbing until they reached a meadow that overlooked the entire valley. From here they could see the forge, a small building with smoke rising from the chimney. They could see the roads that crossed the valley, the farms spread out like patches on a quilt, the river that wound through the center of it all. It was beautiful, and it was theirs. "Do you remember the day we met?" Quentin asked. "When I walked into your forge and you were in so much pain you could barely stand." "I remember," Willa said. "I thought you were just another customer, just another person who needed something from me. And now you are my husband. The father of my children, the person I trust most in this world." She turned to him, her dark eyes serious. "Do you ever regret it, staying here, giving up the road?" "Never, not once." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You gave me a home, Willa, a purpose, a family." "How could I ever regret that? I gave you a life of work and worry, 2 loud sons and a forge that always needs something. You gave me everything I ever wanted and did not know how to ask for." He kissed her, soft and lingering. "I love you, today, tomorrow, forever." "Forever," Willa whispered. "I like the sound of that." They sat in the meadow until the sun was high, talking and laughing and simply being together. Then they rode back down to the forge, to their sons and their work and the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. Yates ran to meet them when they arrived, shouting about a frog he had found, and Tobias followed more slowly, carrying the frog carefully in his cupped hands. Quentin scooped them both up, one in each arm, and carried them inside while Willa followed, smiling. That night, after the boys were asleep and the forge was banked for the evening, Quentin and Willa lay in their narrow bed and watched the shadows on the ceiling. "Tell me about the future," Willa said, just as she had on their wedding night. "I see us growing old together," Quentin said. "I see Yates and Tobias learning the forge, carrying on what you started. I see grandchildren maybe running around and causing chaos. I see us still here, still together, still in love." "That sounds perfect," Willa said. "It is," Quentin agreed. "It really is." And it was. The years continued to unfold, bringing joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, but through it all Quentin and Willa faced everything together. Their love, which had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown through trials and prejudice, remained the foundation on which their life was built. The forge rang with the sound of hammers, the sons grew into fine young men, and the valley that had once looked at them with suspicion came to see them as essential, irreplaceable, beloved. It was not the life either of them had expected, but it was the life they had chosen, and it was enough. More than enough, it was everything,